Simon, now switching to English, it's a huge pleasure. I think one of milestones and landmarks of Gregario to have here your presence together with Igor Quintela.
Very nice to be here.
Hi, Simon.
Hello, Igor.
Simon, a quote that comes directly when I think about Rapha is that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And I recall your first jersey, which I have the honor to have it here with me from 2004. And I was looking at it again before our recording. It's admirable. First, the sport wool, so using a new material or actually a revolution of wool, which was traditional. Second, going black when everybody was the full spec of all colors. Third, using pink on a sport that has a lot of prejudice and resistance and being very conservative. So as the quote says, it's a revolution on its simplicity. What did inspire you?
That's very well prepared. You're right. It is about simplicity. And the best design is as much about taking things away as it is about adding things. And my pet peeve is unnecessary embellishment in things. So yes, it's definitely a simple design. The thing that inspired it, though, was it was function and form. Both of those things were important. So it was function in terms of better quality products. And I used to ride fairly enthusiastically, not very quickly, but quite a lot. And when you spent a few hours on the bike, you start to realize that a jangling zip or a zip that catches your neck or a pocket that's in the wrong place or a fabric that doesn't breathe properly or a hem that's not adjustable or sleeves that ride up, or there's all manner of things that after a few hours they start to completely drive you mad. And that was all I could find on the market. There were a few brands, but the brands didn't really seem to care much about performance apart from one or two. Assos was pretty good, set the benchmark. Castelli was okay. But generally they used really poor fabrics and they didn't pay any attention to function or to fit or to trims. And then at the same time, they looked pretty unappealing. And I'm quite a design-focused person. I like creativity. I like architecture and design. I take care in the clothes that I wear. But when I was going on my bike, I was forced to wear these unspeakably horrible color combinations and feel really bad about myself. And yet when I rode the bike, I felt the best about myself. So this really drove me to distraction. And they were the two things that led me to start Rapha. I felt you could have something that was much better, perform better, but also something which was as beautiful and elegant and attractive as a sport that I loved. It's hard to say that now because there are so many nice clothes out there and the aesthetics of cycling has become much more well known. But back then, the aesthetics were buried and it was all about low cost and people hid away and went out under cover of darkness and were pretty socially unacceptable. That's what drove me to design that jersey particularly.
When we look in retrospect, we have wools which had to be sewn. So there's a limitation of what you can needle in. And then you have the polyesters with the possibility of sublimation. And then there was a mess. Why do you believe that mess happened in the design aspect?
Yeah, I think it's a classic case of just because you can doesn't mean you should. So sublimation gave companies and sponsors, probably sponsors in particular, and fairly straightforward designers, the opportunity to do whatever they wanted on a jersey or jacket or other products made of polyester. And they really did everything from pictures to cartoon figures to strange swirly patterns to terrible color combinations. They tried anything. And because cycling is often, particularly in the professional part of the sport, is awash with sponsors from fairly meager kind of markets, agricultural firms, building products, suppliers, small retailers, butchers. They weren't businesses that were designed first. So you had this mash of horrendous logos thrown together by people who should know better. And they had a ball, really. But then at the time, we had to buy that stuff because there wasn't much else to buy. So I remember buying my Mercatoni Uno jersey because I like Marco Pantani and putting it on and thinking, I'm not like Marco Pantani wearing this jersey, that's for sure. And you have to wear this? Luckily, nobody in England knew what Mercatoni was. I didn't know it was a supermarket. But I think people did it because they could. And I think sponsors will have pushed to have their logos as big as possible. And if their colour was yellow and green, let's have a yellow and green jersey. I don't know what Pulte was, but Pulte managed to create probably the worst looking jersey of all time by just throwing everything at the kitchen sink and not really considering how it came out. You could argue that these days there are quite a few products that we do which are explosions of colour. Mm-hmm. But I like to think that with the right design eye, you can make complicated patterns and complex colour combinations work really well. But if you don't try very hard, then you get the mess that we had in the 90s.
Or at least you intentionally play with the explosion, as Rapha did with EF Education last year. So it's an intentional play. It's not just a malpractice.
Exactly. And we don't always get it right. And I think it doesn't always work for everybody. And everything looks good on a super skinny, honed, bronzed male or female athlete from the Pro Tour. Everything looks good on them. When I put it on, some things look good, some things don't. And one of the reasons I went for black is that black is a slimming and generally a flattering colour to wear, whereas pale yellow or other colours might not work. We did a team kit with Santa Cruz mountain bikes, an off-road racing team in America. And I was given a kit because Rapha made the kit. And I really liked it. It's got a very complex sort of paint, wash, camouflage kind of pattern with lots of different colours. And I wore it by mistake. I now think it was a mistake in the US recently. And I saw a photo of me wearing it. I thought, oh my God, that looks terrible. What was I thinking? Yeah, I think.
And that's an aspect because the majority of the road cycling consumers are 35, 55, not super fit because they have a daily job. And that's a real fact. Very few has sub 10% body fat and 20 hours available to train.
I think that's right. And I think we are in danger at the moment as an industry, as a market, of getting more and more obsessed again with the leanest, most professional kind of rider. Lots of the imagery that you see out there, it's stuff that only really works if you've got very low body fat percentage. And I think lots of our core customers tend to get left behind when brands do that. So I think it's a watch out. It really is a watch out. It's definitely a watch out for me.
Simon, which was the initial reaction of the first jersey back in 2004 on putting pink?
I was thinking about it. So only 18 years ago. But the times have changed so much. And I was thinking about it last week because we had a board meeting and we were talking about some lifestyle products, and a couple of the board directors who are not particularly fashion forward, shall we say? Yeah, they wouldn't claim to be aficionados, were arguing for more pink. And I was raising an eyebrow. I was really surprised because back in 2004, we definitely got quite a lot of pushback. And it was horses for courses, really. The people who it was designed for, the people who were somewhat design aware, who were interested in branding, who were visually literate, who enjoyed that kind of thing. Of course, for them, it was a no-brainer. And people who took care in the clothes they bought and followed fashion to a degree, men had been wearing a bit of pink for a while. So for them, it was absolutely fine. But there were some people for whom this was like a sort of statement of war, a declaration of war. And I got quite a few emails from, in my mind, they're all sort of Northern English blokes. I'm a Northern English bloke, so I can say this. In my mind, they were blokes saying, well, I got an email that said, well, I love what you're doing, Simon. I really love it all. But that little bit of pink at the collar, I couldn't possibly wear that, which is unbelievable now when you think about it. But it didn't really cause any problems because we were tiny. We were trying to get going. We had 300 jerseys was the first delivery, I think, or 400 jerseys. We sold them. We then sold 600 the next time. You didn't notice the people who weren't buying. You just noticed the people who were buying. But it definitely caused a bit of a stir. And I'm so glad we did it. All those things, they're so important to do because they become part of your identity and they become something memorable that cuts through.
And talking about identity, another admirable piece is having the band on the arm, the white band on the arm. This is genius because it applies with almost all garments that you guys did, that there was a distinctive band. How did it came to that solution?
So I used to wear a lot of Prada Sport. Not a lot, but I had products from Prada Sport. I couldn't afford that many. I always admired what Miuccia Prada did, and I really enjoyed their sports line, which was called Linea Rosso, which I think they brought it back a few years ago, so it's back in the range again. And they used technical fabrics like Gore-Tex and things, and they were pseudo outdoorsy, although the fit was never quite as good as it should be. It was always really for streetwear. But they marked it out by having this red line, this Linea Rosso, and they'd have it at your wrist or at your ankle or at the back of the collar. And it was visible. A red line is quite easy to see, but it had very subtly in it Prada Sport or Linea Rosso. And you only knew what it was if you got really close or if you already knew what it was. So it was a really nice way of communicating something without having a big logo in your face. So I wanted something a little bit like that. And because we were going to make Rapha fairly monochrome to start with, and we wanted to have black and very sober colours and quite simple, it wouldn't have made sense to have a big logo. And most of Rapha customers and myself didn't want to walk around with stuff with lots of logos on it. So we were looking for a device that could signal Rapha without it saying Rapha. And we looked through hundreds or thousands of different jersey designs, looking for things that we could put in different places. Lots of different stripes, lots of different marks, using the pink in different ways. And Luke, the designer I was working with at the time, showed lots and lots of these things and eventually showed this one with an asymmetric sleeve. And as soon as we both saw it, we thought, no, that has to be it. Because it's asymmetric, it's visually very arresting. You can't not notice it, whereas symmetry is the thing that we're taught to prize over everything. But if you want to cut through, then asymmetry is a really useful device. And it was just on the left sleeve. It was just white on a black jersey or black on a white jersey. And it's harked back to the sort of iconography that cycling had in the 50s and 60s, where it was simple block devices. So it had rather a classic sort of elegant look. So we jumped on that. And it was interesting when we launched, a guy called Vin Denson came to the party, and Vin Denson was one of Jacques Anquetil's domestiques, rode for him for many years for Ford France and various other teams. And he came to the party. I invited him to the party because I got to know him. And he brought me a photograph of him and the two other riders from the British team the day after Tom Simpson had died on Mont Ventoux. And they're all sitting there in their white British jerseys, because it was national teams in the tour in 67, in their white national jerseys with a black armband on the left sleeve. And it was exactly at that time we had a black jersey with a white armband and a white jersey with a black armband. And it was just perfect. He hadn't realized that's what it looked like. But as soon as I saw it, and I hadn't realized that that's what they wore, but it was one of those beautiful moments where it all came together. Of course, Simpson rode for San Rafael, and so it all connected up really nicely.
Igor, what did inspire you to create your brand, IKE, by the history and the products of Simon and his team with Rapha?
I restarted to pedal in 2010, and I was introduced in the place on terrible visual clothes, many colors, many ugly designs. And when I meet the Rapha, it came to a new world. When I look the design, the simple of design, my school of design, it's a German school. When I saw the Rapha design, that inspired me to do something, not, but when I saw, I told to me, this is it. This is what I want to vest. I started to study, to design my jerseys. It's not easy. It's very difficult to found my visual identity. And when I started to buy Rapha products, look at that, Simon. I have the social shirts, the T-shirts, the jerseys, the pants, the backpacks. What you think in 2010 Rapha does? I bought. That make me crazy because I love design. I love beautiful. And the pope of my life in design was a Max Vignelli. And Max told in the past, the design is a fight against ugly.
Definitely, we should all join the fight against ugly, I think.
Simon, talk about the fight against ugly. There's a person that you approached and had an important role in Rapha, which was Sir Paul Smith. Can you share a little bit? And I had the pleasure on being on your panel with him at Roulette Live in London. But can you share a little bit about your history and your approach to him to contribute to Rapha?
Yes, of course. I was a customer of Paul Smith since the mid to late 1980s. I used to work for most of the 90s. I worked in Covent Garden, and my nearest his main shop, his flagship on Floral Street, was just around the corner. And so I used to go in there. I couldn't afford to spend there all the time, but I really enjoyed what he did. And the fact that it wasn't just nice clothes, it was clothes just delivered in this amazing emporium where he pulled together all these other things and created this wonderful sort of cave of sort of design and creativity. So I was always a big fan, and he did an exhibition, actually. There was a sort of retrospective of Paul Smith in about 1995 or so, I think, in the Design Museum in London, which I went to. And he published a book called You Can Find Inspiration in Anything. I don't know if you've seen that book, but it was a beautiful book. And inside it talked a bit about his history of being a cyclist and how he was a fairly active amateur racing cyclist when he was in his teens. He absolutely loved it. He rode all the time, hundreds of miles a week, and then had a horrible accident and destroyed his knee and had to give up cycling and went to the local pub where he heard art students hung out and was turned onto the idea of fashion because he'd fallen off his bike. So cycling, I knew, was quite important to him. And it was about the time that I was really falling hook, line and sinker in love with the sport in the 90s. So I had this at the back of my mind. So when I developed the plan for Rapha in 2002, when I wrote the business plan and approached him, and I basically used all my guile, every contact I'd ever made. And I suppose at the time I was probably in my early 30s to mid 30s. So I knew a few people and I was quite good at getting to people. I finally got to meet his marketing director and showed him my early designs for Rapha and wondered if Paul would like to get involved. Could it be Rapha for Paul Smith? Could he be an investor? Could they just help in some way? And the marketing director was a friend of mine, said, this is fantastic. Paul's going to love it. I thought, this is it. So all my attention went into, and this, remember at the time I had no money. I had no investment at all. And it was a complete pipe dream. He said, all you have to do is get in front of Paul. It'll be great. So about 2 months later, I finally got a spot in Paul's diary and went along to his office in Keene Street, and the famous office full of staff. And I showed him the designs and the plans, and we talked about cycling. And he said, this is brilliant. I love it to bits, but I can't help you. I run my own business. It's a private business and I've got 100 projects, and this would be a passion thing for me and it would be massively distracting. So I just can't get involved. So sorry, if I can help in any way along the journey, let's keep in touch, but I can't do it. I remember walking out. Reminded him of this at Roulette Live, actually. I walked out of his office and went and sat in a cafe on Kingsway, which is the street next to his office. And I was so deflated. I was crestfallen. This was all my plans had completely gone up in smoke, and I had to start again. So I had to then go off and try and find money from hundreds of other people instead. But true to his word, we did keep in touch. And in 2007, we designed our first product together, which was a jersey to celebrate the Tour de France coming to London. And it was exuberant and it was ridiculously expensive at £175, which is now a sort of quite common price for a jersey. At the time, it was at least double what anybody else was charging. And it sold out immediately and it became quite a thing. And since then, we've done, 7 or 8 different collections together. I see him every few months and he's been hugely supportive of us. He always comes to our events. When we used to do the Smithfield Nocturne race event in the middle of London around the old meat market, and we get 5,000 to 10,000 people come for the Smithfield Nocturne, Paul would come down just to watch it with us and give the prizes. So he's been brilliant for us. And one of the reasons that pink is part of our identity is Paul used to use pink quite a lot way before other designers that I was aware of, and he used to use it in his identity quite a lot. He'd have dark grey bags with pink Paul Smith script on it, and I always had that at the back of my mind, that pink would be a nice accent to go against the black. It's partly driven by Paul as well, so yeah, he's been part of the journey all the way through.
About details, Simon, what inspiration you to create the internal tags of Rapha?
The inside, the stories?
Yeah,
of course, which you know about because you bought the product, but we've never advertised that fact. And it was never a form of sort of sales. The idea was it was a discoverable thing. that once you'd bought the product and you're riding along and you put your hand in the pocket, or you're putting it in the washing machine and you turn it inside out or whatever, you come across this little story that connects something about the product and its usage back to the sport and things about the sport that we love. I think it comes from two things, really. One is total passion for what the customer experience should be. And as a customer I love being a customer, for brands that I buy, my latest brand that I love is a brand called Niwaki, which is a Japanese garden tools brand. I'm going to be their number one customer before too long. I absolutely love the sort of the interaction. I love the communication with the brand. And so when building my own brand, I wanted it to be all about the customer and to really celebrate that relationship. So having discoverable, surprising things that just go a little bit above and beyond. We used to always, things like the story labels were key. We used to put little stickers of H-fans on the packaging. We put little postcards in. We did stuff just to create the connection. That was really important. And secondly, Rapha was always in my mind. It wasn't a jersey company or even a clothing company. It was a cycling company. So it was all about cycling. So the whole point of Rapha is to celebrate and promote this sport that we love and that our customers love. So to me, writing a story about something to do with the history of racing, which they generally used to be in the early days, or an aspect of riding, and having that in the product totally made sense, because it's just another way of telling stories. It's like having films on your website or having a great Instagram feed now. It's the same thing. It's just we've taken the effort to write them and print them and produce them and stick them in the jersey, even though nobody knows they're going to be there. So, yeah, it just comes from that sort of passion for the sport. It's extra cost. Frankly, it's a pain in the arse. How often has a designer's gone, oh yeah, the product's really done, but we just need the story label. It's like, oh. And then somebody has to go, now it's not me anymore. So somebody would have to then write the story label and put it in. It's the stuff that easily gets cut when businesses start thinking about business, not about the customer. But we've kept doing it, and we've done hundreds and hundreds now. So yeah, that's where it came from. To me, it's a really good expression of what Rapha is the story label. More than a zip that works in a certain way, or the particular design of a cuff, or that's all functional and very important. But there's the extra care and the extra passion that I think people who get it and people who don't get it think it's nonsense.
Yeah.
And that's why I like it, because it's nonsense probably aren't right for us. So,
Simon, of many things over the decades that caught my attention and kept me a loyal customer of Rapha was bringing back and making homage of a past, like the jersey of the 100th Tour de France, which I didn't have the courage to use. It's on my closet because I just scared or damaging it. And actually, Igor has a story, because he has also the jersey number 1 that was spoiled on the laundry. So he lost his black edition one. And with my 100-year Tour de France, I don't even want to have this risk with the front pockets. Another one is on Andy Hampson, the full set, which I bought. How come the inspiration on honoring the past, but bringing with modern materials, updated, fit, as the narrative of Rapha?
I'm trying to think back to why in the first place that was so important to me. I think it comes back to my own journey into the sport. I started riding in my 20s properly and really fell in love with it in my mid-20s. And at the time, you had to search quite hard for information about cycling because it was quite niche. You didn't see it in the newspaper. There were about 10 books that had ever been written about cycling, and I had them all. And there were a few magazines, and I subscribed to them all, but that was it. So you had to really hunt for anything. And when I started looking into the history and just looking into the sport, so you start to read books from 20 years before or see photographs from 20 or 30 years before, I just discovered it existed. I wasn't some sort of amazing soothsayer. I just peeled back the cover, and there was this amazing history of incredible culture, human feats of endurance, drama, controversy, scandal, history that connected into popular culture and political activity. Everything. It was an overwhelming sort of tsunami of stuff that cycling had. And then I'd go to my bike shop where there was 3 different types of Allen key and maybe some lights and maybe there was a bottle cage and there might be a Campag corkscrew, but that was it. So I was just more and more drawn to the fact that there was this glorious culture in cycling. And of course, racing today, well, we're lucky the last few years has been amongst the best years ever, probably, for bike racing. It's been phenomenal. We've got so many interesting characters in the sport, and there's great rivalries and things. But there were quite a long time when that didn't seem to be as prominent. And so looking back to these dramatic stories from the past, there was something more human about them. They were more interesting. And the characters, they looked more like film stars, and they seemed to do things that were much more daring. And they probably did do ridiculous feats of endurance compared to the riders today, where everything's much more controlled and they go faster, but they're professionals. In the old days, they were professionals, but they were forced still to do horrible things. So it revealed this more truths about the human spirit, I think, than you could easily see behind sunglasses and helmets of the riders today. So there was a visual, cultural sort of library, and then there was also all the stories. And we know now that lots of them were either embellished or exaggerated or made up in some cases. But that kind of doesn't matter, does it? I think Tim Crabbe wrote about it in The Rider, which is obviously the greatest book ever written, as well as being the greatest book about cycling ever written. And he talked about it, that actually it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. The fact that you think it's true is the value. And I think that's true of the great stories from the history of cycling. Did Belmonte sit at the top having an ice cream because he was scared of descending on his own? It doesn't matter. The fact that we talk about it tells us something about the human spirit and him as a person, which is fantastic and much better than winning a stage, coming 13th rather than 14th in a stage and winning a race by a quarter of a second in a time trial. Who cares about that? What you care about is these noble acts and these terrible failures, I think. So I just fell in love with it. And it's amazing, really, when you stumble across those kind of reservoirs of joy and interest. This is the only time it's probably happened in my life that I've discovered this thing, and no one else seems to know about it. So I read all about this stuff, and I became a bit of a sort of expert in the history of bike racing, even though, and it made up for the fact that I didn't ride a bike professionally. I wasn't a racer, didn't have all that credibility. People weren't going to listen to me because I was a really good time trialist, or I'd won a stage of the Tour of Britain or anything like that, or even raced for my local club. But they could listen to me because I understood what the sport had been about. And I do think one of the reasons Rapha succeeded is that as a cyclist, I was pretty useless, so I could identify with most customers. Most of us are pretty
like most of us.
Yeah. I wasn't going to talk down to any customer because I'm the same. But I also had this deep knowledge of the sport that came through studying the history. So I could, and things like the Andy Hampsten celebration jersey and Pantani, when we did a jersey to commemorate 10 years since he died, those kind of things, I could bring something genuinely different to the customer that they didn't know about. And I couldn't talk about their FTP or any of that stuff because my FTP was as low as theirs. So, so it's a nice combination, I think.
On narrative, one of the many things that caught my attention is the Rapha shops starting in Soho, London, having the truck, having the cafe nearby, not having the pressure for you to buy something and get away. How did the inspiration of this experience build up?
Yeah, we were always direct to consumer. So we started online, and originally I thought we would be a mail order catalogue business because the internet didn't exist when I was first putting the plan together. Or it didn't exist. E-commerce didn't really exist. But by the time we launched, it was clear that we had to launch as an e-commerce business. So it was always direct to consumer because I wanted to have that relationship with the customer. And we worked with some shops because they were particularly good. They were exceptional and they were good friends of ours. But it was only ever a few % of our sales. So it was all about having a relationship and an experience, a shared experience with the customer. And we did lots of events where we'd go out and be where they were. So we'd always go to the Ataptry Tour every year, for example. But before too long, I really thought there's an opportunity here to have a physical expression of the brand. And it's one thing to turn up with an H-van and some easy ups and some furniture and a TV and field in the south of France and be at the Étape for about 2 days. It's different to have a place where people can come all the time to connect with the sport through your brand. what a brilliant thing to be able to do. And I didn't think we could do it for quite a long time because we didn't have enough funds to do it. And so I actually I thought it might be a distraction. So on the side, I wrote a business plan for a cycling cafe chain, which registered a trademark. And eventually I thought, this is stupid. I shouldn't do this as a separate business. This should be Rapha doing it. It totally makes sense. So I persuaded my board to invest in initially doing 3 pop-ups. We did a pop-up in London, 1 in San Francisco, and in fact 4, 1 in New York and 1 in Tokyo. And we used those as a sort of test case to see if this thing could work. And the idea from the start was, yes, you could come and see Rapha product, but it was as much about seeing cycling as it was seeing Rapha products. The first pop-ups, we had exhibitions of bikes from the Tour de France. We had film nights. We showed the racing every day, which of course we'd done when we first launched the brand in the Truman Brewery. In East London. We'd shown the tour every day and illegally and got away with it. But it was a place to come in, have a good coffee, because we knew coffee was important, and just share time with us, looking at great stuff, watching racing, talking about cycling. We did rides from the pop-ups. We did races from the pop-ups. So it was very much what the clubhouses are today. That was the pop-up. To be honest, they were less focused on product and retail than they are today. And they probably work a lot better now because we can afford, we sell more product, we can afford to have the clubhouses. Whereas initially they were more of a form of marketing. But it was all instinctive. It all made sense to me as a customer. That's what I'd like to do. If only there's a place where I could go and watch a bit of the Tour de France with people who are like-minded and not feel like a social leper. And if you think back 15, 20 years, when I used to watch the racing, there wasn't very much. So I'd record it on VHS and then I would sit and watch it later on in the evening, which you may have to do in Brazil anyway these days because of the time difference. But I'd watch it on my own in a darkened room. It was so depressing. It was such a sad experience. And yet I wanted to sort of promote this sport to the rest of the world. This is something brilliant. And yet here I am on my own, like a real sort of loser watching this sport. So the idea of being able to go, like with football, you can go to the local pub and watch the game with your mates. It's a social lubricant. It's part of life. I wanted cycling to be part of life in the same way. So that was always one of the driving forces for the clubhouses, was you can go and watch a race and have a coffee or a beer with like-minded people and feel totally at home. That's still pretty much what we do, I think.
Cycling has some strange characteristics, in my opinion, which is most of the amateurs, especially nowadays, don't connect much with the World Tour, with the professional cyclists, elite Grand Tours. Yet, Rapha had made a bold move initially with Sky, now Ineos, today with EF Education, to be at the World Tour. Which was the intention then, and which were the learnings?
There's lots of things to unpick in there, I think, actually. The relationship between racing and riding, and professional racing and amateur riding, is quite instrumental, and it's quite an interesting thing throughout Rapha's history. Yeah, racing was my inspiration. Even though I never raced, I was always a rider, but I was inspired by racing, and the culture that I read about and that I fell in love with, it was racing culture. It wasn't stories of people going off bikepacking or taking their bikes across the Himalayas or whatever. And those stories did exist, although they were quite few and far between. The thing I fell in love with was racing, because racing was like the sharp point, the polished expression, the extreme expression of what I went through as a rider. Everything I went through, they seemed to go through, but times 10 or times 1,000. And it brought to life what my experience and put it into sharp relief. And by having that relationship to it, it made my own riding in some ways more enjoyable. And I don't know if that makes sense or whether you ever feel that yourself. If I'm riding through the hills near my house and I'm struggling or whatever, there's a feeling you get. It's not something that's in my mind's eye. It's at the back of my mind. There's something that I'm thinking about Pantagnon des Alpes or one of these events, not because I'm a sort of schoolboy who just wants to celebrate my heroes, but because I've watched those people suffer, and you think, well, yeah, I can go up here a bit faster because I know they've done it too. So there was always this interesting relationship between racing and riding. But of course, we couldn't really do racing to start with because there were three of us when I started the company, and neither of us raced, none of us raced, and we had no credibility. So we would talk about racing, and I'd studied it so I could talk about it, but we were a long way from it. And we started a team with Condor Cycles in 2005, and that was our first step in. A friend of mine who hoodwinked me into doing it, while also hoodwinking the owner of Condor into doing it at the same time. So he made us do it together, and we started to build a bit of knowledge about racing. And then this whole Team Sky thing meant that we could get into the World Tour, which of course, as a fan of racing, was unbelievable, totally unbelievable. I think now, and lots of our sort of more interesting competitors who are much smaller don't do World Tour racing because it's expensive. And you're right, lots of customers don't watch racing. They might watch the Tour or Flanders or Roubaix, but they don't watch racing day in, day out like I do. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they can save money and put it into making all the products look much nicer and having some epic shots of people riding in the rain or whatever, which is what we used to do. But I still think that the sport has a really important role to play. And I still think that the racing is the perfect expression of what riding is. And for us to be involved in it, I just think is a sort of statement of faith that we have to do it. And I also think the R&D you get out of it is pretty amazing. Now, it used to be that when the first Rapha products you could buy, and for quite a long time, the professionals couldn't get products as good as that in their team kits because the team owners didn't care about that stuff.
It was just cost. They were cost driven.
Cool. Exactly. If I can get a jersey for £20, not £30, I'll get it for £20 because it's just about putting logos as the sponsors on. It's about logo visibility, not about performance. Mm-hmm. The last 10 years has been a massive improvement, and now the pro racers get amongst the best gear. Not always the best, but they get pretty good stuff, and it's well fitted, and it's great for aerodynamics. It's all polished in the wind tunnels. So you do get really good R&D from working with the teams, which you didn't used to do. But for me, it's much more of an emotional thing than the technical R&D. It's about being connected to the highest levels of riding. And that's why I'm so passionate about making racing more interesting and solving the problems of racing, because the fact that millions of people don't watch it, I think, is a terrible scandal. And we shouldn't be happy with that. We shouldn't be happy that, it's Paris-Roubaix again, and we love Paris-Roubaix. Fewer people watched it this year than last year. And we're all getting older. So if we want people to watch it in 20 years, we better do something about this.
Or even other sports, like now the cyclocross season. I'm personally amazed. I have a lot of fun watching cyclocross. I cannot even imagine to do one lap that those guys do. Imagine 4 or 6.
I totally agree. Cyclocross is my personal passion. I watch it this time of year. Obviously, it's twice every weekend. You watch it both days. They are, in many ways, it's the most accessible form of bike racing because it's on for an hour. They tend to take their glasses off because it's so muddy, so you can see their eyes. So they're human beings, and they do all the interviews pre and post, which you don't get in road racing very much. And there's rivalry. They're all racing each other at the same people every week. And they're technically brilliant, but also they fall off and crash. And it's so exciting, isn't it? I think it's perfect. Yeah. It's the perfect form of cycling for the modern world, or it could be.
I completely agree. In looking forward, on your experience, on your authority, where do you see heading the garment industry of cycling for us, for normal beings, FTPs?
Yeah, I think it's getting harder to have dramatic revolution in innovation in the way that performance products work, I think. We're now getting to the point where if you really want a dramatic gain in aerodynamics, it's probably going to be illegal what you do. Yeah, we've looked at all sorts of ways of improving aerodynamics, and there are some brilliant things you can do, but the UCI won't allow it. So I think from an innovation point of view, yes, fabrics can always get better and trims can always improve, and things like zips, there's been virtually no innovation for 20 years, which is a scandal. So zips is one place I would look, but there aren't many where you can look for step changes in performance. I think what's much more interesting is making products that are just more wearable and more versatile and not having to compromise in the products that you wear. I'm lucky I can wear Lycra a lot because I'm semi-retired and I ride my bike every day and I'm perfectly happy wearing lycra shorts. And because I am who I am, I can go into the clubhouse and people don't laugh at me. But for most people, wearing lycra shorts is still a bit of a compromise. And I think there's innovations in fabrics, and we're learning that there's ways of making products that are much more versatile than traditional sort of skin suits and what have you. So I think we're going to see a lot more crossover product and people being a bit more loose with what they wear, a bit more creative with what they wear, so they don't just follow this uniform of colour block jerseys and black bibs and a certain kind of shoe. And we all now wear white helmets and white shoes and white socks, which of course is correct. But it's pretty boring, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's lack of creativity. And I think fear of risk, of taking a risk. A few weeks ago, I bought a plum bib chart and I decided to use it. I had a lot of fun, but people looking at me.
Gassed.
And you have some sense of humor. It was plum and orange.
Yeah, but I think as more of us take the bike into the rest of our lives, it still staggers me that lots of people who are our most passionate customers don't ride a bike outside of training and proper riding. They don't ride to the shops, they don't ride to work, they don't ride with their friends to go to the pub in the evening. The bike is the thing they do when they put their pointy helmet on and strap on their Garmin and measure it on Strava. I still find that very odd, but I think those people are more and more an exception. And I think more and more of us are going to be using a bike every day. And that's where the real opportunity is, I think, is in when you're using a bike a few times every day, then the way you wear your clothes starts to change. And you don't want things that scream, I'm a cyclist, but equally you don't want things that don't work for the half an hour you're on the bike or the 45 minutes you're on the bike. And that, I think, is much harder to develop products like that. It's much harder to make something that seamlessly works on the bike, off the bike, into the office, into a restaurant. It's raining, it's windy, it's dark or whatever. That's much harder, whereas making lycra that fits and works really well is much easier. So I think we're going to see a lot of effort on the more lifestyle product and trying to get that right.
We actually mentioned I'm wearing a Rapha product that has many years in my preferred wear when I'm traveling by plane.
An old merino track top, isn't it?
Yeah, the merino track. And it's long-lasting, I think, represents. But my question is, there were some votes on the best design of a professional team over time. And some had voted the La Vie Claire Mondrian jersey. In your opinion, which, if you had to pick one jersey that you think was the nicest design as a pro team jersey, which would that be?
As a piece of design, I would say the Bianchi jersey from 1950s would be the most beautiful jersey. It's celeste blue with white, beautifully proportioned. It's incredibly minimalist and looked fantastic on faster copy. I'd say that's probably
or anything looks fantastic on faster copy.
True, that's true. So that's probably quite an easy one. There are loads. I have loads of favourites. I mean, one of my personal favourites is the polka dot jersey in the Tour de France. The fact that we have a white jersey with red spots on it, and they sometimes get the spots the wrong size, which is terrible. And there's a proportion they've got to get right. But the fact that they have that, I love that. It says so much. To me, it conjures up so many images of July in the sun on mountainsides and these people dancing up. And the fact it's based on a chocolate bar, I think, is fantastic. Now, there are loads. I love the Molteni jersey. I really liked Mappe for a while. Fassa Bortolo I used to like very much. What else? I used to like the Beak jersey, which was orange, which I thought was really good. Luis Akana's jersey. I thought that looked good. I love the Brooklyn jersey. Yeah, with the stars and stripes, chewing gum design. That's fantastic too. There are loads, but yeah, I think in many ways, a simple white jersey or a simple black jersey probably does it. Yeah, the best young rider in the Tour wearing the white jersey before they put logos everywhere. That was a really beautiful thing. When Andy Hampton wore that in 85, I think it was, or 86, that was perfect.
One of the Rapha jerseys I have is a white jersey on homage of Colombia.
Oh, yeah.
That's beautiful with the Colombian colors on detail. Simon, I need to thank here the opportunity by accident that we met in London, thanks to Renata Grabert and to Matteo, that had the privilege to meet you in person, which created a connection for you to accept our invitation. It's a great honor, it's a highlight for Gregario, it's a Christmas present for our listeners, and great honor to have your time, your attention, and your generosity.
Oh, it's been a great pleasure, and happy Christmas to everybody.